Hello, hello. Hello, Internet. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I guess we will start out by making sure that everything is working. So let me know in the chat if you are seeing two big modular cases and whether or not you are hearing me. And how the audio is, if I'm too loud or too quiet. And I'm realizing now, of course, that there will be a delay. So you will all hear things happening a little bit after I say them. Okay, everything's looking good. Sweet. We may have to balance the audio a bit once I actually start playing some music to make sure you can still hear my voice over that. But so far, so good. Yeah, so I wanted to do this stream because I've been working on this journey of building out my modular cases over the last year or so. And as of a few days ago, I placed this module right here, VC transitions from ADAC system, and that filled the last slot in these two big cases. And I thought it was kind of a fun milestone to kind of geek out about the topic and share with everyone. I haven't done a live stream on YouTube before, so this will be pretty much off the cuff and just making sure that this is a format that I like and that people are interested in. So what I wanted to do today is, first and foremost, would be answer questions. Like if people are interested in modular or curious about it and just want to understand what it is you're looking at, I'm happy to entertain any questions or thoughts or whatever you want to talk about. In the absence of interactive discussion, I thought I would start by kind of giving an overview of like what all of this is and my thought process in designing it and how I chose the modules I did and kind of what the purpose of it all is and kind of how I got here. Now, depending on the audience, as we get going here, I think maybe like a deep sort of technical dive into like each module is probably not super interesting except for the really big modular geeks. So I'll probably keep it pretty high level, but I'm happy to go into detail about anything that anyone is interested in. And then once we get through kind of like the talking bits, I thought it might be fun to do kind of a patch from scratch where make some sort of little piece of music without playing it in advance. I don't have any idea about specifically what I would do. But we can use any particular modules that look fun, or we can just kind of wing it. So that is the plan. I've also got a couple of OBS scenes set up here. So it was kind of difficult to find a camera setup that was actually good enough quality to be able to see the level of detail that you would need here. And sadly, I don't think I have the ability to show close-ups very well. I do have this scene here where you'll be looking at the left case kind of zoomed in. I don't know if like that, like the resolution of that is any better than just seeing the overhead. And similarly, I've got one for the right case because it's still just the same camera, kind of like a digital crop essentially. So you're not gaining any resolution with the zoom. So you have to let me know in the chat if like seeing the modules kind of zoomed like that is of any benefit, like if you're able to see anything more clearly, or if I can just stick to this this overhead shot. So I'm seeing that the resolution is okay. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I have a few different cameras that I considered using for this, and like none of them was quite right for what I wanted. So I ended up just using my iPhone because that has the best resolution of anything I had. I also have a Canon DSLR, which is actually not very good for video. Like it does, for some reason, the sensor is not good for video, even though I have really nice lenses for it. So that would have been ideal. But sadly, no. And also, I didn't have a mini HDMI cable for that. And then I also tried the GoPro, which is what I usually use for filming my videos. But that is a very small sensor, and when it's used in webcam mode, it didn't have very good image quality. So iPhone it is. Okay, so we need to get more complexity, according to Interstellar. Let me get out maybe some additional guitar pedals, and maybe when we bust out with the patch cables, then things will start to look more complex. Sorry for the simplicity. Okay, so I have a few things set up here, but just some basics. So I've got kind of this is the mixer, this big black thing right here. And the main out of that is going into this stereo output, which is going into the Poly-N press compressor, which is my newest pedal, and then back into the case, and then directly to the outs over here. And then this part right here is a stereo effects end that's going to the reverb, which is the Big Sky MX right here. And this box here is just powering the pedals. But everything else that I'm going to be using is modular. So yeah, let's see if there's any questions before we get started. Yeah, everything seems good. Cool. Thanks again for coming. Really appreciate the support from all the folks that I know. I hope this will be fun. So how I got into this, I was trying to remember, actually. I don't remember where I first heard or saw modular stuff. But I do remember kind of how I decided that I was interested is that, so some of you know that I did music production when I was a teenager, and that was kind of like the traditional sort of DAW approach to writing music. And then I completed these 2 albums that I was really, really happy with. And that was about, my first one was in 2001, and then the second one was like 2004, 2005 era. And after that, I kind of went into this period of writer's block because I was so happy with those 2 albums that I had made. And every time I tried to write something, I would just feel like it wasn't as good as what I had already made. And I got this kind of writer's block where I just couldn't, like, I wanted everything that I made to be like worth recording and kind of worth keeping as sort of like a legacy. And I couldn't come up with anything that I liked as much as what I'd already done. And partly because of that, and partly because just, usual life stuff, I got out of music for a really long time. And then only started getting back interested in the idea in 2020, kind of a few months before the pandemic started. And I got the idea, I think what actually started it was that I saw a video on YouTube about the Native Instruments Machina, which I actually have in the closet, but I didn't think to bring it out. But it's kind of like a groove box sort of thing where you plug it into the computer, it's got a bunch of pads on it, and you use it as a MIDI controller to sort of do, these kind of little jams all with one device. And it just looked like a really fun gadget. And I wanted to maybe see about trying to throw my hat back in the ring to get into music a little bit again, and just kind of put my toe in the waters and see how it went. So I ended up getting one of those, and there were a few channels that I I guess I was searching for YouTube videos about it, and I ended up finding there's a YouTuber called the Midlife Synthesist who had some videos about it. And shortly after I started following him, he did a video that was talking about other sort of music YouTubers that he liked. One of which was Jay Hosking, who you will see in the chat, and another was Miles Kundra, who also do a lot of sort of hardware-based, usually live electronic music. And so I started to get into this world of sort of online music performers, and got really interested in this idea of kind of these half improvised sort of live performances. And I really got into the idea of like, what if I just made music a thing that I do for fun, and I don't save anything that I do, just kind of I jam and I don't record, and I just try to like enjoy the process of making stuff and not worry so much about creating some masterpiece that I'm going to record and release as like a concept album or something. And so that was kind of what interested me about getting into hardware. And I realized also that, so when I was doing this as a teenager, it was like in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And this was just about the time that things were going from hardware to like all software, like everything was becoming virtual. So the studio that I was building up as a teenager was kind of like about to become obsolete in the way that most music is made now. But I really enjoyed like the gear aspect of it. Like I like tech toys. I like gadgets. And so the loss of that world is something I think I felt. And so the idea of getting back into hardware as something to be a way to inspire me to be musical instead of just staring at yet another program in the computer is kind of what started to appeal to me about all of this. So I was watching these hardware jams, and I actually don't remember where I got into modular specifically, but I do remember the reason that it interested me, which is that I picked up the Electron Digitone, which is another groove box. It's an FM synthesizer. And then I got its sort of twin companion, which is the Electron Digitact, which is a sampler. And they're both kind of groove boxes. I've never been much of a sampler user. I'm more of a sort of a synth guy. Because I find I'd rather just like design some sounds with a limited set of controls. And with a sampler, it's just like the sound could be literally anything. And you have to go either sampling your own instruments or going out to the internet and finding samples. And that part of the process didn't seem that appealing to me. So I was looking, but I was interested in, exploring the Digitact and in particular using it for drums, which is really what it was designed for originally. And I wanted some like sort of drum grooves that I could chop up on the sampler. But I don't really like the idea of like just going to a website like Splice or something and downloading some drums loop that someone else made and slicing that up as the basis of something of my own. And so somewhere in there, I came across some stuff about modular on YouTube, I suppose, and realized that this would be potentially a really interesting way to do some kind of generative drum stuff, to get something where I could get complex patterns that I wasn't necessarily sequencing in a traditional way and use them as sample fodder for the Digitact to start slicing things up. So I started to learn a little bit about modular, and I was playing with it in VCV Rack. And then after a pretty short amount of time in VCV Rack, I realized how interested I was in the concept of this. I think some of you may know that my day job is as a software developer. And so the sort of the programmer part of my brain kind of really enjoys the problem solving and the creativity and patching that happens in modular, that you're not just getting something that's off the shelf. Like you really have to think about the design and the flow and how to use connections between these disparate parts in interesting ways. And I was so enamored with the idea. I was like, this may be like the perfect melding of, the sort of left and right halves of the brain, so to speak. That was, something that's kind of like a fun kind of intellectual exercise, but the result of it is art. And that really spoke to me. And so that's kind of how this got started. I realized I should have prepared some of the photos that I took of the racks as I was building them, because it might have been fun to see kind of like how this existed in its earlier state. The common joke with modular is that it's kind of like a drug addiction. Like you get your first module and you're like, oh, I'll just get a few. And then it quickly grows and you keep buying them until you've spent your life savings. And so I'm very fortunate that, I have the financial means to do this as a hobby. This was over the course of a year, but I mean, that's a lot even in 1 year. And I was worried for a while that it was going to be like, oh, I'm enjoying this too much. Am I going to have like an addiction problem with this? Am I going to not be able to stop buying them? Am I just going to always want to buy the new thing just because of the sort of dopamine hit? And I'm happy to report that at least my experience in this first year is that it slowed down a lot. Like as I started to sort of complete the major building blocks that allow me to do what I want to do, there's new modules coming out every week, and some of them are fun and interesting, but most of them don't fill a specific need that I'm looking for. And so I haven't felt the fire that I initially did to like buy the latest thing. Of course, as the joke goes, and the whole premise of this stream is like, hey, I finished my cases, quote unquote. And the joke, of course, will be like, a modular case is never finished. So true to form, I actually did order an additional module since the time that I planned this stream. And the one that I got is going to be swappable for this guy, which is a snare drum modeler, Kraken from WMD. I'm getting one that is like a hand clap modeler. So I'll be able to swap that in and out here based on whether or not I want to use a snare or a clap. Anyway, there'll be more modules in the future, I'm sure, that will excite me, that I'll pick up. But the idea of modular, in addition to picking the signal flow once your case is built, is also swapping things in and out. So even though I found a configuration here that I am happy with, I'm sure that there'll be things that I move in and out as things inspire me over time. And I'm sure a year from now, I'll be laughing at myself when I thought that I was done with just 2 cases. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. Let me check the chat because I've been talking at you all for a long time. Yes, asking about how the pedals are working. Yeah, so I have a couple of ways of doing that. One of them I just added recently, so it's a little hard to see maybe with the cables covering it, but this little silver module that's in the bottom right corner of the left case, this is called Neve Grad from Noise Engineering. And this allows you to sort of send signals in and out of Eurorack by changing the voltage levels. So Eurorack runs very hot. Like the signals are much louder than even professional line level equipment. So the way it works is let's see, actually I haven't plugged this in yet. So let's actually do that now. So if I take the stereo, so the mixer has 2 sends, A and B, both stereo. If I take the left A send and send it into this input here, and then this one into this input, these 2 cables here are reducing the signal from the modular by 12 dB. So it's essentially changing it from modular level to sort of line level. And then these 2 black cables are going into the stereo inputs of the reverb pedal. And then the stereo outputs of the reverb pedal are coming back into the module here via the same type of cables. So they go into the input, and then these 2 jacks here increase the level again. So coming out of here will be plus 12 dB to bring it back up to modular levels. And then this goes back into the return. So then I have the ability that per channel on the mixer to send, amounts of each instrument into that stereo A send, and it'll go through the signal path and end up with the reverb. So this can be either 2 mono signals or 1 stereo signal, but I have a second send. I usually use that with C-legs, which is this delay over here. But I just in the last week replaced a few of the modules that I originally had in my top row to give me another stereo effect send, which is what I'm using the poly-end play for. So this works basically the same way, that I'm sending the master output of the mixer into this stereo line output, and that's going into the poly-end play, the poly-end press, excuse me. This operates at line level, so that's fine. And then the output of this comes back into the top of the case, which connects to this stereo in, which I'm sending to the stereo out in this case, which goes to my computer. And hence you're all hearing this. Yeah, exactly. Someone noticed that there's 1 silver module in the black rack, which is that was one of the things that came about from things being shifted based on my initial plan of where things were going to go. So initially when I bought the Neve Grad, it was in the top rack. I refer to it as the top rack because if you've seen my videos before, I usually orient the cases vertically. So this one is actually on a couple of connections and it's kind of up in the air like this vertically. But I wanted everyone to be able to see this face of both cases very clearly for this video. So I put them side by side. But anyway, I realized that there were some things I wanted to be able to fit into this case that I couldn't with this Neve Grad in there. So I moved it to the other case. And as a result, it's the one thing that doesn't match the color scheme, which is really funny. Noise Engineering actually sells like replacement plates for this. So I could buy like a black cover of this just to make it match, which maybe I'll do someday. Like if I'm ordering something else from Noise Engineering, maybe I'll throw that into the batch because it does kind of bug me. I hope no one watching has OCD because that could get pretty annoying. But that was one of the other parts of this puzzle that I thought was really fun from the standpoint of modular being like you're designing your own instrument, is that, there's no technical reason why you need to have it like this kind of color scheme match. But I thought that if I was making my own instrument, that could be a part of the puzzle and the sort of problem solving about how do I get the right collection of modules that line up in exactly the right amount of space and also have some sort of consistent look to them. And so initially when I just had one case, it was like a row of silver modules and then a row of black modules. If you go back in my published video history, you'll see some of my performances where the case looks more like that. And then once I realized I was getting 2 cases, I started with like a silver row and a black row in each case, and then later decided to kind of do them in this kind of black and white sort of strip. So that in some cases that made finding things that I would otherwise have used not possible, because I wanted to stick to this sort of self-imposed constraint of keeping this color scheme going. So probably a lot of other modular enthusiasts would call me silly for bothering with that. But I thought it's for me, it's for my own enjoyment. Why not put an extra limitation on myself? And except for this, one mismatch, I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. I think it's very pretty as a synthesizer goes. Anyway, so let's see. Let me check if there's any more questions before I continue blabbering on. Yes, yes, as they always say, limitations breed creativity, and also I think in some ways make it easier. Because in the same way that like working in software can be kind of difficult because there's no limits and you kind of have the problem of like too many choices. To some degree, that's true in modular too, because there's like hundreds of modules. I don't even know how many Eurorack modules there are, but there's a lot to choose from. And so it's like, how do you even decide what you want? But anyway, as I said, the way that I started was focusing on it as something I was going to use for drums. And so these modules over here is what I started with. This black one called U-Grids. This is a clone of a Mutable Instruments module called Grids. Mutable Instruments is these ones over here with the kind of stripes and the pretty silver panels and the kind of consistent color scheme. So this is a very, very popular modular company. I think they're probably like the most popular, but shut down. So the company doesn't exist anymore. I think they stopped producing modules about the time that I got into modular. So all of these original Mutable Instruments modules that I have are ones that I had to get used because they're not produced anymore. The cool thing about Mutable Instruments, in addition to like just how good they are, is that the designs are open source. So an effect of that is that a lot of other companies have continued to produce clones of the Mutable Instruments modules that come in different form factors and sometimes smaller. So the real Mutable Instruments version of Grids is much larger, and it has, you can kind of see how the spacing of these knobs are kind of larger on the real Mutable Instruments modules. I thought that the one for Grids was much larger than it needed to be, and so I opted for getting a clone in this case. But anyway, what this does is this is the thing that generates patterns for drums. So it essentially has a bunch of pre-programmed patterns for 3 percussive instruments in it, which are usually modeled as like kick drum, snare drum, and hi-hat. And it has you can kind of think of it as like kind of like the drum version of a wavetable, if you know what a wavetable is. It's like there's you think of like a sort of like a spreadsheet with columns and rows, and each cell on the spreadsheet has a different pre-programmed drum pattern in it, and you use the X and Y controls to sort of pick a cell on the spreadsheet. And the reason that it's interesting is that rather than just selecting a pre-programmed design, you can actually morph between the cells. So you pick, like, say, 2 adjacent cells, you slowly change between the 2, and then the pattern becomes a blend of the first one and the second one. So you can sort of modulate it over time to come up with something that doesn't repeat in a predictable way. And this was what I chose to be sort of the driver for this initial idea I had about making modular be my source of sort of custom drum loops that no one else had. I mean, to some degree, other people have it because, again, the drums are pre-programmed, but a given sample that you make with it is unlikely to be exactly the same as anything else because of the fact that you can modulate these over time. And then also, of course, the fact that you can send the 3 triggers to any sound source that you want. And so there's plenty of different drum modules or way of synthesizing drum sounds that I could do. So let's actually start with this. Let's make something so you can actually hear something. So let's switch to the left case. So hopefully you can, I don't know if you'll be able to read the text per se, but maybe it'll be a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. So Grids has 6 outputs. It's got out 1, out 2, out 3, and then it's got accent outputs for those same 3 channels. So Crater here is my kick drum. Kraken is my snare drum modular. These are like modules that are designed specifically to make those types of sounds. And then maybe for our third voice, I'll use maybe Timpleggio, which is a drum module from Noise Engineering, this guy here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first out of grids and I'm going to put it into the trigger input of Crater. That'll be our kick drum. And then I will take the second output and stick that into the head input of Kraken. Kraken has both a head and a rim input, so you can make two different snare sounds with the same module. And then our trigger for, let's see, is this going to reach? Let me see if I can use a small cable for this. Out 3, yeah, that kind of fits. Let me send it underneath. So stick that into Timpleggio, that'll be our hi-hat. And then I'll need to plug in the audio signal so we can actually hear something. So let's do output of Crater into our first mixer channel, output of Kraken into our second mixer channel, and then we've got, let's see, is this going to be a long enough cable? Yes. So we've got stereo out from Timpleggio for our hi-hat. And then if I turn up the clock, if I did this right, we should start to hear something. So let me know if you were hearing the drums, and also let me know how loud it is, whether you can still hear my voice over the drums and relative volumes. Question, are the cases powered from the power that was in there? Not sure what you mean by in there. The cases are powered, they have a power supply internally. These cases are from IntelliGel, and they have a power supply built into them. You can see the cords in the back left that are going off the back of my table and just plugged into a power strip underneath. And they give plenty of power, so I didn't really have to worry about whether the modules I bought would have enough power. Okay, so you're saying the drums are low on volume. Let me try turning, I guess I can just turn up this guy. Maybe I'll turn it down for myself. Tell me if this is too loud. I turned it up pretty significantly. Let's see, is my master out? Seems okay. Turn on the compressor also. Maybe that'll help a bit. Drums are way low versus voice. Let me try turning up the actual input on my audio interface. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. It's because I have it really low here. Let's turn this down again. Okay, I just increased the volume of everything in OBS. Hopefully I didn't blow anyone's ears out. And I might need to turn my mic down now. Is this better? Okay, sweet. So let me turn this down. I'm going to turn all of these down and I'll explain kind of from the bottom what grids is doing. Okay, so we've got a clock here. This top knob determines the tempo. And then these two knobs here are map X and map Y. So that is the... Oh, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. The X and Y are the things I was talking about that like determine which of the pre-programmed patterns is going to happen. And then these three knobs control essentially how dense the pattern is for those three triggers. So this is like channel 1, channel 2, and channel 3. When the knobs are turned all the way to the right, then they trigger as often as they ever will for that given pattern. And as you start to pull the knobs back, they keep the same pattern, but various notes from that pattern are removed. So you have fewer hits per loop. So you can kind of change the density. And so I usually like to have kind of the hi-hat a little bit more often, the kick drum a little bit more often than half, and then the snare a little more rare. Miles has joined us. Hello, Miles. May have missed the beginning where I was talking about how Miles and Jay were two of my big gateway drugs into hardware music. So thank you to both of you. Cool. So now we've got a loop that's going, and we can mess with the drum sounds to change them up if we want to. I don't think it's really that important to demonstrate what it's doing. But the cool part about this is then modulating the X and Y parameters. So let's take an LFO. Let's see if I can use a short cable here. So I'm going to take an LFO from Oct here, which is just kind of like a... Well, let me use a fast one to start, actually, so you can really hear it. And I'm going to stick this into the CV input for the X position. So it's over time, it's changing which cell has been selected of the pre-programmed patterns. And as a result, the pattern is not consistent on each loop. Let me stick this actually in the middle because it's a bipolar LFO, so we'll have it go. Maybe pick a slower LFO so it doesn't change quite so fast. So you can hear it really, it changes pretty significantly, and you can kind of dial in the degree to which you want it to change. There's also this chaos knob, which kind of injects some variation into the patterns themselves. So the more you turn this up, like I can pull this out, so it's no longer changing the pre-programmed pattern, but if I turn chaos all the way up, it's still going to vary a little bit on each loop. So it's kind of got some pre-programmed randomness in addition to being able to modulate the patterns. But I mean, you can also do this manually as a way of performing. So every little bit of the knob of these X and Y knobs that you turn will change to a different pre-programmed pattern. And so you can get variation in what you're hearing in the drum pattern just by moving one knob. So anyway, as I said earlier, like this is where I started. This is like what I thought I was going to use Modular for, was just like kind of a drum machine, and I would send it to the Digitact, and that's what I would use it for. But also, as I said, I found that I really enjoyed this as a way of satisfying every part of my brain for musical expression and problem solving. And I quickly was like, oh, I'm going to want some melodic voices too, so I can do something more than just drums. And so the obvious choice for that was, let me turn this off for a bit. The obvious choice for that was Mutable Instruments plates, controversially pronounced. Apparently in Europe you say plats, and people love to tell me that it's pronounced plats. But sorry, I'm American, so it's plates to me. Anyway, this is as I said, this is from Mutable Instruments, who are like the most popular module company. And plates is what's called a macro oscillator, or like that's the marketing term that they use for it. But basically it means it's like a digital synthesizer with a whole bunch of different engines in it that can do a bunch of different sounds. And so I thought that this was like, it's very popular. I think it's like one of the probably 5 most popular modules in Eurorack. But it's very versatile because you can do a lot of different stuff with it. And so I decided that this was probably the one that I should start with for melodic sounds. And it also has percussive sounds too, so I could also use it with grids. as a way of doing percussion. It didn't have to be just these two particular modules. And so fun little tidbit is that this specific plates that I have is actually secondhand from Jay Hosking. So I'm very honored to have Jay's former plates in my case. So let's maybe add that so you can hear a little bit of what it does. Although I don't have any sequence set up. Maybe we'll just start with like a drone, I guess. Maybe we'll use it for a bass. I need some longer cables for this because usually they're closer. So I'm going to take the output into the 4th channel. Ooh, that's loud. So it's just going to be droning to start. Actually, you know what? I better send this into the data so I can check the tuning. Okay, long cables. So this guy that I'm plugging in on the right is Mordac's data, which is an oscilloscope. I mean, it does a bunch of things, but that's the kind of primary use that most people have for it. Let's see. What am I doing wrong here? There we go. Actually, I'm going to use it as a tuner right now. So one thing that's a little annoying about Eurorack is that oscillators can be tuned to any bass pitch. It's not like MIDI where you send it a specific signal and it plays a specific note. The standard for pitch in Eurorack is just relative. So you send it like a voltage and it'll play a pitch relative to what it's tuned to, but what you tune it to determines what the root is. And as a result, every time you bump the frequency knob on one of these things, the sort of baseline note that it plays. And so that means that you have to tune your oscillators to get the right bass note. So that's what I'm using the more. Oh, wait, I didn't change the case. Sorry, I need to remember to switch. So you're not seeing what I was talking about, but now you should be. So Mordac's data is this guy over here. And so you can see I'm using the tuner mode, and it's just showing me what note is being played. Let me actually bring this in so you can hear it too. Tell me if this oscillator sound is okay volume-wise compared to my voice. So I can mess with the frequency to get it as close to an even C as I can. All right, that sounds fine. So let's get rid of our tuner for now, and we'll get more of a medium-sized cable. Let's see if this can reach. So I'm going to send this to channel 4. Can be louder. Okay. So let's put it like this, and then I need to turn it down so I can hear myself. How's this? Is this still quiet, or should it be even louder than this? Let's turn grids back on too. All right, so I've got plates in its default mode, which is called pair of classic waveforms. And it's like two waveforms that are playing at the same time. And the timbre knob here controls the first wave, and the morph knob controls the second wave. And you can change the wave shape of each one. So actually I should probably put this on the scope so we can actually see what we're looking at. So I should have left it the way it was. 1 second. Let's do it this way. Let's take... is this okay? Yeah, that'll work. So output into the scope again, and then let's send this back into our mixer. Oh, you can see it changed to C3 before I had it on C2. That's fine though. Okay, so if we go to the oscilloscope, then I can turn on display of the actual waveform of the oscillator. AC coupled, position should be 0. And true to normal. There you go. So that waveform that we're seeing now, I don't know how clear that is on the stream. You'll have to tell me. But that green trace that we're seeing is the actual waveform of the plate's oscillator. And as I change these two controls, we'll see the shape of that wave change. Make it a little less often so we can see. Let's see, scale. There we go. That's probably a little easier to see. So I think the way it works is the left knob is kind of like a variable width square wave. You can see the width of the pulse changing. And then as you start to go more clockwise, it kind of gets these spikes at the edge. I think it's kind of getting a little bit of distortion and feedback. So that's the first wave, but then if you turn it all the way to the left, it goes silent. And the right one, I think, is like a triangle. So yeah, you get, I guess I have to go. Yeah, there we go. Now you can see it. So you get like a kind of a saw wave, and that also turns into a triangle, which is, of course, much quieter, probably hard to hear. But anyway, so you can morph from triangle to saw to this kind of jagged saw with like a flat top. And then that wave is mixed with this other one. So you can get like a pulse wave sine combined. And then you can detune the two waves from each other. So right now they're at unison, but I could also make one like an octave lower or higher than the other. Or I guess it goes down 2 octaves even. Or up. Anyway, you get the idea. So let's turn that off for the moment. So anyway, this is plates. That's just one of the things it does. And so you see that those little lights in the middle, when you press these buttons, it like cycles through the different engines. And each one of these things changes the function of all of the knobs. So you're really getting a lot for your money. Like at least related to other Eurorack modules that tend to do like one thing. This thing does a whole bunch of things. And some people don't love that about it. I think this was, if I'm remembering correctly, this is the reason that Jay didn't really want to keep it around, is that it's kind of like, because you don't have a single control for every function, it's hard to remember what the knobs do in all of these different modes unless you use all of them regularly. So it is true that this is one where, unless I'm using one of the really common ones that I use a lot, I'm very often having to like refer to the manual about like what the knobs do and what the different modes are. You can kind of remember it from these little symbols after a little bit of practice, but for some people that's a bigger deal than others. And for me, starting out with my case, like the versatility was what really mattered. So I'm trying to remember kind of the order that I got things in. But over time, I got a few additional sound sources. So let's see. My case is not really distributed in terms of like the functions of the modules being grouped together. You can see to some degree there's like modules from the same manufacturer that are sometimes next to each other. And sometimes it's more about sort of signal flow in terms of the way that I'm expecting to patch things kind of from left to right and generally like top to bottom. So my various oscillators are kind of distributed around the case. Let me go back to my overhead shot of both cases. Right, so plates is the one we've been talking about. That was the first one I got. And I think the second one was probably rings, which is this one that's next to it. This is also very popular and also to some degree kind of a meme module that is so overused that a lot of people don't like it anymore. It's a resonator, so it kind of simulates the way an acoustic instrument, like a stringed acoustic instrument, sounds like when you pluck the string, and the vibration resonates like in a guitar body. So it's got a bunch of sort of physical model stuff that creates those kind of plucky string sounds. And this is very commonly used as the audio source for ambient music with Modular, to the point where people recognize the sound instantly and are like, yeah, I don't want to hear this anymore. But I heard a performance that was using it that I thought was really beautiful. And I was like, I think this would be, I guess I wasn't sick of it. So to me, I enjoyed the sound. But it is true that it's very distinctive. I guess I should probably play a little bit of it so you can hear what I'm talking about. Let me do out here, and let me just give it a clock. Let's do 1x. I think this is the mode that is probably most liked. So you can see it has this kind of like string sound, like you're plucking a string. You have controls over the brightness and how long the sound rings out. And then also this control position is kind of modeling like where you physically hit the surface of the thing that's resonating. So it's kind of just like a timbre control. Anyway, I think it's a really pleasing sound. And it's got a few different modes, a few different models that it can do. Like there's a modal one. The one that I'm using right now is called sympathetic strings. And then there's an inharmonic strings one also. They all sound slightly different. So you can make kind of more percussive sounds with this one that don't have obvious pitches or that don't sound like something you'd use as a melodic instrument. So you can get kind of like bells almost. Lots of different sounds. So I think it's a very fun, pretty module, and I think that was the one that I got next. Someone recognizes the Modbang cables. Yes, that's right. So these cables that I'm using are from a company called Modbang, which is owned by EasyBot, another music YouTuber who does a lot of stuff, mostly with Electron, but he does Modular also. So these cables actually glow in the dark. I have a whole bunch of them, but I kind of settled on a subset of the colors that I thought were easier to see, because some of the cables, like if you shine a light on them, you'll see their color, but the energy doesn't last very long. And when you turn the lights on, some of the colors that are technically different kind of look the same in bright light. So I ended up sticking with the cables that are easier to see when they're not glowing. Oh, by the way, the convention that I use for cable colors is blue cables are like clock sources or triggers or gates, things that are just on or off. Red or orange I use for audio signals, and green cables like this one I use for CV, like continuous variable voltages, like pitch or LFOs, things like that. And sometimes I use so many cables that I run out of all of the color that I need for a given size, and then I have to kind of break that pattern. But it's better than just buying an infinite supply of cables to have the right number of them for any given application. Let me turn this off. Let me check the chat, see if there's anything I have missed, or people were wanting to know anything in particular. I will say that the downside of using like color coding per function is that it can be really annoying when I want to unpatch things and put the cables back. I guess I don't have a camera that can show you this, but I have a little rack that's off to my left that is like on a mic stand where the cables kind of hang in these little teeth, and then it hangs down to the ground, and I have them sorted by length and by color. And when you have a big mess of spaghetti cables, it's kind of annoying to like pick out all of the ones that are the same color and the same length to put them in their right place. So I've heard people say before that the best way to do the coloring is to just make each color the same length. So if you want a cable of, 18 inches, it's always green. And so that way you can easily identify all of the cables that are the same length when you're unpatching them to put them back. Personally, I find that the process of like putting the cables back after unpatching is kind of like this strangely calm sort of meditative experience. So I don't actually mind that it takes a little bit longer to sort of sort through them and put them back. And I find that it helps me kind of make visual sense of the mess of cables when the patch starts to get more complicated. So it's working for me. I might not do it that way if I were to start again from scratch, but since I have so many colors like this, it's just kind of the way I've gone. So we were talking about sound sources that I have. I guess technically it's a sound source, but this one next to rings is another mutable instruments module called beads. This is the last module that Mutable Instruments created before they shut down. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the only Mutable Instruments module that was not open sourced. So you can't get a clone of beads. But it's also sort of like a spiritual successor to another very popular Mutable Instruments module called Clouds. And that's the one that Rings is often paired with, to the point where people are sick of the Rings and Clouds combo. It's kind of a meme. But what this does is it's a granular synthesizer. So you send it audio input, and it chops up little segments of the audio that you're sending it and plays them as sort of like individual notes. And then you can mix between you can sort of crossfade between the signal that you're sending it and the grains that Beads is generating. And so it makes this kind of random, washy, kind of pretty sound that pairs nicely with Rings. I mean, we should honestly do it because it's just like, it's like the most Eurorack thing is like these modules. So let's do Rings in stereo. So we're going to take the left. So Rings has like an odd and an even output, and you can change the polyphony with this little switch up here. Let me go back to my right case camera. So yeah, this little switch right here and these three modes, that changes the polyphony. So if I change it to the red mode, then it'll allow 4 different notes to ring out at the same time. So if I send, and it kind of, I think it alternates between the odd and the even output. Let's see, let me take a shorter cable here. See, I'm already running out of red cables. But let's take the left and right out of beads into the scope. I mean, I guess the scope doesn't really matter here. Let me turn on the other one though. Let's see what I've got it at. 1 volt, position 0, AC on. I guess we'll want this a little lower actually. I put it at like 5. It's a little hard for me to see the screen at this angle. Scale 1 volt. Okay. So now the green trace is the left channel and the blue trace is the right channel. Let me move this one up a little bit. All right, close enough. And this is an audio signal now. So let me turn off normalization. Go to auto mode. There we go. So now we're seeing actual audio waveforms. Let me get this on so we can hear something. Let's start with the raw signal. And let's actually give it, let's give it 4x. So now we're getting 16th notes relative to 110 BPM. And we don't have any pitch, so let me go back to strings mode because this is like the obvious good stuff. Okay, so what we're hearing now is just rings raw. But if I start to bring in beads, you hear that high-pitched sort of glitchy delay sort of sound. That's coming from beads. So if I turn it all the way wet, we'll hear only the granular part. And I have the pitch all the way up, so it's increasing the pitch by an octave of what the input is. I can put it back down to even. So it's got a bunch of controls that allows you to sort of change the size of these little grains. So this size control controls how long each grain lasts. So as I turn this up, the little chunks will get longer. You hear more of the original sound. It's not as percussive. And then there's like a volume envelope that's applied to each grain, and you can change that. So here's like just on off, like a square wave. And then we've got a sharp envelope that has like a percussive attack and then a gradual decline in volume. And we have the reverse, if you want kind of like a slow swell in and a sudden stop. And then you've got like smooth on both ends, which has kind of like a tremolo sound at high speeds. And you can also play the grains in reverse, which sounds very cool. And it's got its own built-in reverb. But honestly, you need a pitch sequence in this for it to really sound like anything interesting. So why don't we do that? Let me take... Oh, I need to reset this from whatever patch I was doing last. Okay, so this module on the left here with the yellow button is called Pamela's Pro Workout. If you're following my channel, you have probably seen that I've done several videos that focus on this, because it's another really great versatile channel that like is easily like the top 5 most popular modules, because it does a lot of stuff, and it's just like it's a good driver. What it does is like it sends various clock signals. So this is kind of like your master tempo for everything. You set what you want the tempo to be, and then you can start and stop the clock, and out of each one of these jacks is some sort of up and down gate signal that's being sent at a rate that's relative to this tempo. So you can do like multiplications and divisions. So I can send like twice as fast, 4 times as fast, 24 times as fast, or half as fast, but it's all related to this main tempo. But in addition to just doing gates, it can also do all sorts of other wave shapes as to what voltage it's sending out on these jacks. So I can take, let me get a longer cable. Actually, no, we'll do a short one for this. So if I take like this first one, and I'm going to send it into my quantizer, which I'll explain in a second, and out of the quantizer into the volt per octave input of rings. So if I go to the first input, I don't know how well you'll be able to see the text here, but it says modifier 1 times 1. That means it's going to be sending a clock at exactly the same rate as the tempo. I'm going to change this to 4x, so we'll get 16th note values out of this output. And then I'm going to hold the button down, which gets me into a sub menu with additional settings for this particular jack. And here I can change the shape of the waveform that's being sent out of this jack. So it starts in just like binary sort of gate where it's either on or off, but there's various other wave shapes like multi sort of ratchet gates, a triangle wave, a trapezoid, a sine wave, a kind of a half rectified sine wave. And then we've got envelope shapes, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this second to last one is sample and hold. So this is random voltages. And actually, I don't even need this. I can just use the built-in quantizer. So this is going to send a random voltage every time the trigger would be sent. And we can hear actually if I turn this back on, we're now hearing random pitches being sent to rings that are then being granularized. Let me turn this off. So here's just rings by itself. You can hear it's playing random pitches now because I'm sending random values every 16th note to the pitch input of rings. But Pamela's Pro Workout also has a built-in quantizer. So I can move over to the quantize page and I can change it to like a minor scale. And so now it'll quantize the voltages that it's sending out so that their relative distances between each other form the natural minor scale instead of just random notes. So now you can hear that it's playing pitches that sound much more musical. It's a little high, so let me turn it down actually. Get a little bit of a lower sound. It's also a lot of, it's playing very low and very high notes, so I'm also going to change the level, which is like the highest voltage that can come out of this jack. I'm going to change this down to like 30%, so the range of the highest note to the lowest note won't be so high, so large. Let's go back up to C-ish. There we go, so that sounds relatively musical. So now if I bring beads back in now, you'll get this ambient wash. And so this is the kind of sound that is like, this is like the meme sound. Because everyone has rings and clouds or rings and beads, and so everyone does this. And people get kind of sick of the sound of it, but I think it's pretty. This density knob in the top center of beads controls like how often the grains are created. So at the center, like at noon, it doesn't do anything, and then as you turn to the left, it increases how often they happen in kind of even divisions of time. And to the right, they're kind of more randomized, so they're not as predictable. It's not like it's against a clock. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff you can do with this. It's also got like different modes for audio quality. So I have it in the highest fidelity mode right now, but we can put it down into like this kind of lo-fi mode. Actually, I think this one is the nicest. So it's just kind of like a texture generator. It can do some very cool stuff. And you can also freeze the input. So if I press this, it's going to stop listening to the incoming audio and freeze what was in the buffer at the time that I press the button and only generate grains from that. And then when I press freeze again, it releases it and starts listening to the incoming audio again. Ah, yes, question. Do you use beads as a wavetable oscillator too? Yes, I do. I've done that frequently. So let's turn this back off. So if I unplug the connection from rings to beads, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there's this little white light above my finger, which is showing, like, listening to the incoming audio input. And after a few seconds of it being unpatched, it defaults to like a wavetable mode, so that rather than listening for incoming audio, it's actually going to generate its own waveforms. And it's got a built-in wavetable in here, which I think actually matches the wavetable engine of plates. So in this mode, let's actually turn it back to the dry signal. We'll just be getting like a solid tone. You can control the pitch here. There's like kind of the clean sound. In this mode, the time knob, which I actually didn't talk about, will change the sort of position of the wave through the table. You'll scan through the table. Let me turn this pitch down. That's pretty brutal on my ears. And then this little feedback knob is the bank of the wavetable. So there's, I think, 8 or maybe 16 different tables. Here's another table. So again, this like most mutable instruments modules is very versatile. So you can use beads either as a processor for incoming audio, or you can just use it as a normal wavetable oscillator with these as the source. Yes, my apologies to the dogs. So some of these are more pleasing than others, in my opinion. Some of the really harsh kind of overtones can be kind of unpleasant. But there's some really nice ones too. And then of course beads can granularize its own input. So if I turn it wet again, it may be harder to hear on this one. Okay, so those little pinpricky sounds, that's beads creating grains from its own oscillator, which I can mix back in. Now in this case, it's like the oscillator and the grains are playing the same pitch, so you're kind of hearing the same thing. It's a little hard to distinguish one from the other, but you can kind of hear that both of them are present. Anyway, a lot of cool stuff you can do with beads. Yeah, the mutable instrument stuff is like pretty expensive because of the fact that it's so well regarded, and the company doesn't exist anymore. So these like originals are not being made. So I won't even tell you how much I paid for this stuff. It's embarrassing. But it's kind of like having a piece of Eurorack history because there's a limited, like any sort of thing, any scarce product, it grows in value the few of them are when there's a lot of demand. I think the only clone I have is Grids that we talked about earlier. I think that's the only module I have that is not a Mutable Instruments original. Oh wait, that's not true. Oh wait, it didn't go back to overhead. There we go. Another thing I wanted to mention is like mistakes that I made. So you'll see above the two cases, I have 5 modules that are just sitting loose on the desk. A thing that worried me earlier, when I was first starting with this, is like, I didn't want to buy something and then like spend a bunch of money and realize, oh, this isn't actually what I want. There's kind of a worry of like getting the wrong thing or something that doesn't work as well as you wanted. And especially, where you have limited space in a case, it's like for everything that you put in your case, that's a bunch of other things that you can't put in your case because the space is now gone. So a lot of people warn about that. It's like, don't go too fast. Like, research and like understand what you're going to get so that you don't end up buying things that you end up not needing or not wanting. And so I put these up here just to show the places where I ended up not keeping things in the case that I did buy. So given that there are something like 60 modules across these two cases, I think that 5 is actually not bad for what ultimately didn't end up in the case. And as I mentioned earlier, like, part of the point of modular is that you can swap things. So if I have if there's some particular use case where I want to use one of these instead of something else, I can just pull something out of the rack and put one of these other ones in. It's just like more tools in the toolbox. And then realistically, I'll probably get a third case at some point to put, some of these smaller miscellaneous ones in. But I just wanted to point out, like, in terms of like the journey of how this changed, I think probably the most notable ones are those 2 black ones. That's the Black Stereo Delay 2 and Black Stereo Reverb from Erica Synths. Those were the like effects modules that I had when I was building out sort of this groove box idea using only one case. So initially I had like the mixer here, and then I had the delay and the reverb sort of to the right of the mixer because I was trying to sort of match the signal flow. So it's like you mix everything together, you send bits of them into the send effects, and then I had a compressor and then my output. But what I found is that those, I didn't love the sound of and the flexibility of the controls on those. I found that it kind of had, especially with the delay, there was like one specific setting with feedback and timing that kind of gave me a sound I wanted. But like most of the panel was not something that I was interacting with much. And they're fairly large. Like I think those things are 10 HP. So there were a lot of smaller modules that were more flexible that I felt were like a better value for the space. And then also, oh, bye, XE. Thanks for stopping by. Appreciate the support. I also started, integrating pedals. And I felt like with reverb, reverb is kind of a set and forget sort of effect, I feel like. Like sometimes I will modulate certain aspects of a reverb, but I won't often like do drastic changes to the reverb during a performance. And for that reason, I think it was less important for me to have a reverb effect in rack and for it to be controllable. So when I got the Big Sky, which is like a very versatile, like multi-algorithm reverb, it was less important to have a reverb in the case. And so I was able to pull that out, gain 10 HP back for other stuff. And then similarly, the delay, I think I was using it for a while and then ultimately replaced it with Sea Legs, which is this big one on the bottom right below the oscilloscope. And delay, this has a lot more delay sounds that I like than the Erica Synths one did, and also has a lot more control. So it's got its own reverb actually, so I can do reverb here too. It's got like its own noise control, so I can do sort of like lo-fi sounds, and it has CV control over every parameter, a built-in filter, all sorts of cool stuff. And it's something I'd had my eyes on for a while. So that replaced the black delay. Then that white one that's in the middle at the top, this guy up here. Let's see there. Now I'm pointing to it. That guy right there is actually the same. That's another Mutable Instruments clone of Branches. This one here with the sort of magenta and turquoise knobs. It's like a sort of a probability module that like takes in an input and sends it to one of two outputs randomly based on a coin toss. And that white module up at the top is a open source clone of Branches that has 4 channels instead of 2. But it's slightly wider. And when I was doing the sort of Jenga to get all of the modules that I wanted to fit the case, I found that I was off what I wanted by exactly 2 HP, which is the difference in width between that clone and the original Branches. And then I also noticed that I only ever used 1 or 2 channels of the Branches clone, so I didn't actually need 4 channels. Rob, thanks so much for stopping by. I'll see you around. So anyway, that's why I ended up with a clone of Branches and then the real Branches. So I was like, I don't need the 4 channels and I do need the 2 HP. So I ended up switching. And then those top left 2 are IntelliGel 1U modules. The one on the far left, which is this guy, that's an oscilloscope like this one. But it's, much less featureful. And I got that little one before I had the big one. So by the time I had the big one, I realized I had 1 oscilloscope in each case, but realistically, I didn't really need the small one. So I've taken that out. And then the last one that I took out, this guy, is called the FSR from IntelliGel, which stands for Force Sensing Resistor, I think. And it's like a touch sensitive thing. So you can put your thumb on it and press. And the harder that you press, the higher the CV signal sent out of it will be. So it's a way of kind of adding an ability to perform in a way other than turning a knob or a slider, which I thought was kind of a fun way to do performance effects initially. And I still would have it in the case, except I just ran out of room. Like I recently, I think I took those 2 out and I added in its place the additional stereo effects end. And then I had a little bit of space left, so I had added a sort of passive LPG. This is like it's like a combination between a filter and a VCA. And yes, Estada notices that I only have 4 VCAs. So I think So the dedicated VCA modules I have are the quad VCA right here. So for those of you who are not modular geeks, VCA is something that allows you to control the volume of another signal. So you send input into this, and then you send the output to your mixer or whatever, and then you have a third control signal that comes in that allows you to use a control voltage to change the volume of that sound. So the traditional use is like you send an envelope into the control voltage, and you use it to make like plucks out of an oscillator that is otherwise just droning all the time. And of course, you can use it to modulate other CV signals, so it doesn't have to be just audio. So I could take like an LFO or something, and then modulate the LFO itself with another LFO to create a more interesting modulation shape. So lots of uses for VCAs. So I've got this one, which has 4 channels of VCA, and then I've got the linear one up here. So this is 2 channels of VCA. And then this is technically kind of a VCA, this LPG. Several of the oscillators I have built-in envelopes and VCAs in them. So you can see like I used plates and rings and beads all without using a dedicated VCA module because they have them built in. So I find that in practice, I actually don't use VCAs as much as you might think. I think I'm trying to think what my most common use case is. And definitely, I think the classic example of like applying an amplitude envelope to a droning oscillator is a common use case, but it's pretty rare since so many of my sound sources have built-in volume shaping. And also because I have this, in modular mixer, which I think for a lot of people, they're using VCAs as essentially a mixer. Like they're just, because there's like an offset. I can control manually how much of the sound is coming through independent of the CV control. So you can just use this as a 4-channel mixer. And because I have this 8-channel mixer over here, I don't use it for that purpose as often. There's also the quadrat, which you can see I have one of in each case, this sort of utility module. That's kind of similar to a quad VCA, except that it doesn't have voltage control. So it's 4 channels of like in out, and you can use it as like a volume control like this. But they also, and they cascade into each other. So you can use it as a mixer too. But it's also an attenuverter, which the VCA doesn't do. So if I flip this little switch here, then the knob becomes bipolar. So instead of going from like 0 to maximum volts, the 0 is in the center position, and I can make it go negative to the left and positive to the right. So this is just kind of like a utility that has a lot of different purposes for mixing, attenuating, offsets, all kinds of stuff. The other thing that you will have seen me do if you've watched any of my other videos is I use them as macro controls. Like the last video I published was about that topic specifically. Because if you don't have anything plugged into the input, then the output is normalized to like a static voltage that's just based on the position of the knob. So if I stick this, and I guess we can actually, well, I won't bother, but if I plug the output into something else, and then I slowly turn this knob, the voltage that's being sent to that other module will increase. And so I can use this as a way of like kind of doing a build. If I send the output to a multiplier that copies the signal a bunch of times, and then I send those copies to a bunch of different destinations, then I have a macro control where I can modulate a whole bunch of different parameters by turning only a single knob, which is a really great performance effect. Anyway, I don't know how long we've been going at this point. It's like an hour and 20 minutes. So I don't know if I have the wind in me to like really do much more of a deep dive on all of this different stuff, unless anyone has any particular questions about what you're seeing. But I have a lot, I guess I'll talk about just kind of like the big high level stuff. So if we've seen some of the mutable instruments things, these 3 in particular kind of like my main sound sources. And then I have a few more here that are about, this one is a filter, this one in the middle. And then the one on the bottom left, marbles, is another kind of like random generation sort of machine. And stages is this one with the sliders here is used for creating envelopes and LFOs. It's actually a brilliant module. I think this is one of my favorites, just because it's so flexible. It's just the design of it is very clever. So I've got a lot of mutable instrument stuff in this case. This case, I think, is mostly, or in terms of one manufacturer, the one that I have the most of is noise engineering. almost this entire bottom row is all noise engineering. I think this Cosmotronic Messer is the only one that's not noise engineering. So obviously you can tell that I like noise engineering stuff. I think it's all very well designed. And the thing that is most valuable about them in this context is that, at least the ones that I have here, Basimilus, Iteratas Alia, Manus Iteratas Alia, Timp Legio, Ruina Versio, Polydactyl Versio, all of these are like DSP platforms. So there's a bunch of different alternative firmwares that do different things. And you can connect these to your computer with a USB cable and flash one of the other firmwares onto it. So for the price of one hardware module, you get up to like 10 different modules that you can use with that same hardware. And then you can get these little overlays that look like this. Let's see, let me put these out here so you can see them. So these are like little panels. So when you flash a firmware onto one of these modules, you can put the panel over it so that you can remember what the controls do in that alternate firmware. So I've got several of their like DSP platform modules. So Basimilus is like a drum synthesizer, and Manus is kind of like an industrial kind of sawtooth, bassy, raspy, kind of nasty oscillator. So those two Alia, these are mono oscillators, but I think there's like 5 different firmwares for this. So having 2 of them allows me to run 2 at the same time. Initially, when I was first building out my case, I got Basimilus first, and then I got Manus, and the idea is that I would use one as drums and one as a melodic voice. But really it just allows me a lot of flexibility to use 2 of them at the same time. Yes, that's correct. You don't have to use a screwdriver or anything to take the module apart. These just overlay on the top of the module. So let me patch this so you can see more easily. But it just drops over on top. So if I want to change Polydactyl Versio to Imitor Versio, I pull the module out of the case, connect it with a USB stick, flash it, put it back in, and then I just drop this on top. And it just lays on top of it. But changes the labeling under each knob and each control so you can remember what everything does. The one thing I don't like about their panel system is that you can, well, I don't know how well you can see this, but let me try switching to the left camera. Let me actually find the Polydactyl, or actually the Ruina would be a good example. Ruina Versio. So when you buy a hardware module in one of these DSP platforms, there's a bunch of art on the panel, the face of the panel. So in addition to having the text giving you the name of what it does, there's also like a graphic that has some visual representation of what it does. And I find that sometimes the names can be kind of hard to correlate with what they do, because there's, unless you're using a particular module a lot and you really get to know it, it can be hard to remember like what the control actually does, even if you know its name. And so I think it's actually helpful to have the graphics, because it gives you kind of a visual indication to understand what it does. And the panel overlays only have the text labels. They don't have the graphics. So you can see like the kind of squiggly line with the arrows above phase, but here's the panel version of Ruina Versio that doesn't have that, which I think is kind of unfortunate. I don't know why they do that. It's like they're already, 3D printing this. Why not just put the whole thing on there? I guess maybe it saves a little bit of money or something, but that's kind of a drag. But it's a small price to pay for the like incredible flexibility of being able to use all of these different firmwares. I mean, look how many of these there are. Well, a couple of these are just blank, and these are from Hotel Traffic. So for these 3 DSPs that I have, there's actually more. So I've got all of these are different modules essentially. And so I think I've tried them all at this point. Every time I'm doing a song for YouTube, I try to pick some module that I didn't use in the last one, just so I'm trying new stuff all the time. But really like these noise engineering DSP modules, because it's so much like value for the money compared to most other things in Eurorack. So anyway, I've got 2 of the Alias, which is like their mono oscillator. I've got 1 Timp Legio, which is called, their Legio platform is stereo, and is mostly melodic voices, but some percussion. So I got this one as the baseline module is percussion, but again, you can flash it to anything. And then Versio is the effects platform. So this is like reverbs, delays, distortion, dynamics control. And so the ones that I bought directly are Ruina, which is a distortion, and Polydactyl, which is a multi-band compressor. But I very often use these with different firmwares on them for different types of effects, depending on what I'm doing. So lots of those. The mixer that I have here is also noise engineering. So almost this whole bottom row is noise engineering. And then also one of my most valuable modules is this far bottom left corner, Mimetic Digitalis. This is a sequencer, and it's 4 channels, and you can see these little lights on it. Let me actually give it a clock signal so we can see the lights move. There we go. So what this does is it allows you to set CV value, different CV values for each one of these lights. It's like a 16-step sequencer. And every time you send it a trigger, it just advances to the next step. But you can advance in different directions. So I have it plugged into N, which just means go to the next one in the row. And then if you are at the end of the row, go to the next column. And then when you get to the last column, go to the next row. So it's literally 16 steps. But you can also do row-wise only motion. So I can go just along the x-axis, or I can go just along the y-axis. And then you can reset the position and various other things. And then there's 4 channels. So there's like little 4 buttons here. Because you can have 4 different sequences that get sent out of these top 4 jacks. And so this is really good as just kind of an interesting modulation source that can be either pitches or just, modulation for any other parameter. And it can be either randomized. It's got like a shred button that allows you to sort of randomize the steps. Or you can use the knob to dial in a specific CV value for each step, which is kind of painstaking. But if you have a reason to do it, then it does kind of, in a pinch, work as kind of a standard sequencer for something like pitch. But this is really valuable as like a modulation source. And it also is very playable. So being able to change patterns and reload sort of saved ones on the fly. A lot of really cool stuff that it can do in a very versatile modulation source. Dreams Are Maps. Thanks so much for sticking around. Thanks for the support. I guess the other major category of stuff is filters. So I've got a few filters. Blades, I think I mentioned from Mutable Instruments. This is the most recent filter I got. This is like a stereo or dual mono filter. It's really dual mono, but it can be used kind of as in stereo. It's got like wave folding built in, so you can use it as a distortion. It's multi-mode. Oh, wait a minute. I need to change my camera to the other case so you can actually see what I'm doing. So it's got multi-mode, so you can kind of morph between low pass and high pass. Did this not trigger? There we go. Okay, now we're looking at the right case. You can morph between low pass and high pass. It's got resonance control, all the usual stuff, and then routing, so you can control to what degree the left and right channels are aware of each other, serial or parallel routing. So that's one of my filters. In the right corner over here, this is the first filter I got. This is Dual Dagger from a French company called Shackmat. And it's just very small, very flexible. It's got a high pass filter and a low pass filter that have independent controls, optional resonance on both. You can link the controls to control them as a bandpass filter. Just very good value for its size. And then what other filter? Oh, another filter I really like is this guy in the left case. Let's go back here. This one right here, Icaria from Bastel, which is, I think, a Czech company, if I'm not mistaken. This is an excellent filter. It's stereo in, stereo out. It's like a DJ style filter where it's not filtering in the center, and then to the left is low pass and to the right is high pass. And it's got a built-in envelope follower. So if you turn this up, it'll kind of do like an auto filter, like an auto wah sound that will automatically modulate the cutoff for you based on how loud the input signal is. So you can kind of get a wah effect just from giving it like a plucked sound. And pretty much all, what else is there to talk about? Oh, Castor and Pollux and Neptune. So this is from a small company called Winterbloom, which has very cool designs. Castor and Pollux is a dual oscillator that's mimicking like the Roland Juno architecture. So it's like very rich analog oscillator with like very good sounding chorus. And then Neptune is sort of a spectral filter that made from the same company that allows you to do low pass and high pass at the same time, so that you can kind of blend between two different inputs spectrally, like not just the volumes are changing, but actually what part of the frequency spectrum you're hearing. And so I've got various other modulation sources and things for randomizing. I've got a quantizer for getting, specific melodic pitches out of random signals, some logic modules, and then there's various other bits of I/O. So right here in the bottom right corner, I have IntelliGel Stomp, which allows me to use mono guitar pedals with expression control. And then I also have a expression pedal input on here. So I have an expression pedal under the desk that can plug into this, and it allows me to use the expression pedal to control CV stuff in the rack. And then the last thing that I got, as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, is this VC transitions module, which is going to become my new go-to for macros, like the macro thing that I was describing earlier, where you can kind of use a single knob to change a bunch of stuff at once. The reason it's hard to do that with Quadrat is because if you want to do like kind of a slow build and then a cut back, like where you like maybe change a bunch of parameters as things build up, and then right when the drums come back in or whatever, you want to drop where everything suddenly goes back to how it was. That's very hard to do on a knob like this, where you have to rotate the knob from its maximum position to its minimum position and like essentially instantly. That's kind of hard to do without it being audible that you're turning the knob. So what this thing allows you to do is kind of the same idea. It's got 5 channels that can go to 5 different destinations, and the range of voltage that you send to each is configurable. And then there's a little slider here that you use as like a crossfader. So if you're familiar with the Electron Octatrack, this is pretty similar to like scenes on the Octatrack. Obviously, Octatrack is much more powerful because you can switch what the left and right edge of this do to a bunch of different things, whereas this is essentially just fixed to one scene. But the idea is that you can, as you move the slider to the right, the voltages coming out of these 5 outputs are changing to whatever you've specified and changing 5 or more parameters, and then you can instantly snap it back to the left to get that sort of instant drop without the difficulty of turning a knob. So that is really something that I was wanting in my rack. And when I saw that existed, I'm like, this is perfect for the last slot. Okay, it's been an hour and a half now. Nastada, thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you for the great questions. Appreciate it. So maybe at this point, I'll just mess around, make a little patch. For anyone that's still here, feel free to ask questions. Or let me know if there's anything more you want to know. But if not, I will just hang out for a few minutes more, maybe make a little bit of music, and try to talk a little bit about what I'm doing. But I think that concludes the let me geek out about my rack portion of the stream. Thank you, Oculus. Thank you for coming. Appreciate the support. Glad you enjoyed it. All right, give me a second. I'm going to take a drink of water because I've been talking for an hour and a half straight. And we're back. Okay, so let's get our drums going again. What was I using this on? I think I'm not going to do rings, plates, beads. So let's get rid of this stuff. What are we going to do? Okay, so this was kick and snare. use a clock source for this. So we want, I think this is at 24 points per minute. Okay. All right, 110 BPM. Where is my third sound? Need my hi-hats. Okay, so this is kind of where we started with the drums earlier. So now I'm clocking grids externally, so Pamela's Pro Workout is determining the tempo. And get one more cable for the reset. There we go. Let's dial in a nice kick drum sound. I want something kind of more subtle, not so techno-y. And for our snare drum, we do like a rim shot actually, rather than the head of the drum. Want something kind of subtle. Why am I not hearing? Let's see. Let's get. There we go. So I'm going to use Timpleggio for the hi-hat. Okay, cool. That's decent sound. Let's give this some delay before we do much else. So my A is going to, oh, I wanted this on B actually. I'm switching this. I usually do delay on send A, oops, and reverb on send B. So I'm switching the send, the send that's going to the big sky to B. And let me quickly set up the send for the delay, for which I'm going to use C legs. So this is stereo from output A into C legs input left and right. And then we need the same thing coming back from the outputs. Back into A and B. Okay, and let's send some hi-hat to the delay. And we also want to clock the delay so that it's in time with our tempo. So I'm going to give it just a 1x clock and stick this in the clock input. Maybe give the snare a little delay too. Maybe a lot more delay. Why do I feel like I'm not hearing it? Oh, there we go. Maybe these cables are a little wonky. So that when there's a clock signal coming into the C legs, then this first slider is like controls the division or multiplication of the delay. So I think I have it on kind of like I change it to medium length. No, let's. Still seems awfully quiet. So what am I doing wrong here? Let me try. Let's give it a 2x. Okay, that sounds cool. Gives us much more of a groove to have that delay in there. And then let's give it some reverb too. So let's take 2 and 3, turn up to like 48% reverb. And then maybe I'll just dial in like a room reverb, something pretty small. Actually, let me max that out so I can hear the sound of it. There we go, just got a little bit of like room reverb. Sounds good on the drums. Maybe a little pre-delay. And then let's turn the amount down. There we go, just give it a little bit of space. And let us modulate the X and Y parameters, because it is awfully boring just hearing the same loop forever. So I've now changed the X and Y positions slightly, so we've got a different pre-programmed pattern. And I'm going to take, as I did before, an LFO from Oct, which just gives me 4 LFOs that are not synced to any particular tempo. And I'm going to use this module here, Lapsus Os, from another from Noise Engineering, to attenuate it, because the output of Oct is always going to be like full 5 volt to full negative 5 volt voltage range, and I don't want to turn the knob all the way. I just want it to vary slightly, so I can use this to attenuate that signal so that it varies at the same rate, but it doesn't change as much at its peaks. So we'll send the LFO in there, attenuate it, and then come out into the grids. And so now as I bring this up, it'll modulate that X slightly. And then I'm going to do the same thing with a different LFO that's at a different unclocked speed. So it'll every time through, it'll change in a slightly different way. Like it's not synced to the tempo. And we'll use this to modulate the Y position. And same thing, we'll give that maybe a little bit more variation. So this should give us a drum beat that feels cohesive, but also doesn't repeat very obviously. I realized another thing I should do is like the part of the reason I got Crater and Kraken, in addition to them just being really cool in that they can model kind of realistic kick and snare sounds, is that they pair really well with Grids, because Grids has like three main outputs, but then it also has accent outputs per channel. And the Crater and the Kraken have accent inputs, which allows you to emphasize a particular beat. So if I take the accent of the first channel and put it into Crater's accent, and the accent of the second channel and put that into the accent of Kraken, then we should get a little bit of dynamic change from hit to hit. I find that it's kind of subtle, but it just adds a little bit more natural feel to the groove that it generates. This actually sounds pretty cool, to be honest. I'm liking what I hear already. So, maybe a bass line would be good. Let us use, what are we going to use as a bass line? Oh, I guess Manus is the obvious choice. So let's get, I need to tune it first, I guess. I guess it doesn't really matter. Let me send the output of Manus into the fourth channel. And let's get a not terrible sound out of this guy. So I was mentioning before, like I don't need a lot of dedicated VCAs just for melodic voices. Manus is an example of one that has an envelope built in. So if you turn this envelope control all the way to the right, then I may not be able to see it because of the cables, but this top right knob is envelope. So if you turn it all the way to the right, then it just drones forever. So you can use your own envelope if you want. But it also has a built-in envelope and you can trigger it. So if I, let's take a trigger from Pam. We'll do this second output and we'll send this to the trig input on Manus. And now if I turn the envelope knob down, it'll trigger the sound with an amp envelope according to what you've set here. I gotta turn the volume up now. There you go. So now you can see every time this, oh, I gotta go back to the overhead. But every time this green light above the second output flashes, we get a note on Manus. And so the envelope can control from very snappy to very long. Can get almost percussive, like you can't almost not even tell it's melodic, to like more of a stab, to softer, then the attack can really start to slow down. So maybe about there is good for like a bass sound. And let's change the rhythm to something more interesting than just quarter notes. Let's try like, oh, wait a minute, I'm changing the wrong one. So 1.3x gives it some good syncopation. And then we're gonna need some melody, please. So let me go back to origin. And let's just randomize the first channel on Mimetic Digitalis. And then we're going to take the output of Mimetic And I'm going to send that into my quantizer, which is this guy over here, the Bard Quartet. This is because the mimetic digitalis doesn't really have a concept of exact pitches. It's just random CV values. I could tune it by hand to pitches, but what I'm going to do is just have it generate random values, and then I'm going to use the Bard Quartet to snap those random voltages into relative values for pitch, so that when I send them to Manus, it's playing, you know, pitches in a Western scale. So I'm going to send the output of the Bard Quartet into the pitch input of Manus. And then we need to give a clock to mimetic so it actually advances. And right now it's just playing C and B. So let's maybe give it a... Let's give it the minor scale. So there we go, random bass line. Maybe what we'll do actually is, instead of making it 16 steps, I'll make it just one row. So we get a little bit of more repeatable musicality. It's a little easier to hear this as a repeating pattern. And I can just hit this sort of randomized combo. Let me see, I don't know if you can read the text, but these buttons on the bottom here, this one says 0, and it will, when you press it, it'll set the voltage of whatever step you're on to be 0, and then shred will set it to be randomized. But you can also hold down the load button over here and press shred, and that'll randomize all 16 steps. And if you hold load and press 0 and shred at the same time, it will randomize steps, but only in a voltage range of like 0 to 30%, which is more useful for melodic lines when you don't want, you know, super high and super low notes at the same time. So I can just hit load and then 0 shred to get new melodies. That one's not bad. So Manus also has a built-in low-pass filter. I'm going to turn that down a bit to make the bass not so bright. And it's also got another envelope that you can, or I guess it's not an envelope, but this control called bash that you can use to route the envelope that you've set for the amplitude to the other parameters. So as I start to increase this, it's going to imply the same amplitude envelope to the cutoff of the low-pass filter also, and you'll start to hear a bit more of that wow sound on the attack of the bass, which I think sounds great for a bass. It's going to also increase a couple of these other controls. Smash, which is like a wave folder. And then profundity, which is kind of like a phase manipulation thing. The other control that Manus has for timbre is this saw mod, which has a very distinctive sound. So I think those guys would maybe be a good choice for an LFO. So let me do that. Let's take another LFO from Oct and send it into the third channel of the Lapsus Os to attenuate it. And then we'll take the output from the attenuated signal, and we're going to send that into maybe the saw mod. Let me actually make this a faster change. So that's at full strength, no attenuation. And if I start to pull down this slider, it'll attenuate the range of that LFO, make it a little more subtle. That sounds pretty cool. I dig it. Give it a little profundity for some of that phase modulation. A little wave folding. Yeah, Manus Ateritos is just a great sounding voice. It's awesome. All right. Oh, let's give that some delay. Of course. Of course. Maybe I will filter the delay though, because we don't want quite so much of the low end in the delayed signal. And let's put a little lo-fi in the delay, get that crackle going. I mean, that sounds pretty damn cool. I could just listen to this for a while, honestly. Just adjusting the... Oh, I need to remember to switch my cam so you can see what I'm doing. I was just adjusting the compressor, the poly press that's just compressor on the master output to kind of get a good sound. So I'm thinking maybe one more melodic voice and then we'll call it. So another cool thing that the Bard Quartet can do is it can function as an arpeggiator. So what are we going to use for this? I just need one more sequence. So I guess I just need a trigger for the arpeggiator. So normally the way Bard Quartet works is it takes in a voltage that's going to be translated to pitch, and then it quantizes that voltage and sends the quantized voltage out to your final destination. But I can go onto the second channel here, and I think I press the arpeggio button, and then there we go. So now channel 2 has been changed into an arpeggio, and now instead of taking like CV input, it's going to expect a trigger. And so if I send it just like a quarter note pulse from Pamela's Pro Workout, every time it receives a trigger, it's going to send the next note in the arpeggio out of this output too. So what are we going to use for our second voice? Maybe plates. Just so I can piss off the people that get upset when I pronounce it that way. So let's send this to the volt per octave of plates. And then we need to get this connected to our mixer. Now it occurs to me that these might not be tuned to the same pitch because I didn't tune my oscillators beforehand. So let's see. Go out of the ARPG menu. Just gonna give this the minor scale again. Okay, I need triggers now. So notice I don't have anything plugged into the trigger of plates, so it's just droning, constantly playing. But it does have a built-in VCA. So if I give it a trigger, and I can actually do this through Bard Quartet, although I guess there's no reason to bother. I can just trigger it directly from PAM because it's going to be the same rate as the pitch change. So we're just going to give it quarter notes. Or maybe 16th notes would be better, actually. I'm going to change it to 16th notes. So output 5. There we go. Let's bring that in. And then I need to... just controlling its built-in envelope there. Hey Sam, thanks a lot. Thanks for hanging out, appreciate it. Let me turn up the pitch here. Actually, keep it at C, but we'll just change the octave. Okay, so I'm actually gonna have to tune this because it doesn't sound right. A bit unfortunate. All right, so I'm gonna pull the pitch on Manus for a moment, and let's get a long cable so I can figure out what pitch this is. Tuner. Manus is playing something. Let's give it full envelope. Why am I not seeing anything? Oh, I probably need to turn the LPG on. Let's get rid of this. Why are we not hearing anything? Or why are we not getting a strong signal? Okay, there we go. So let's get this up to C2. Okay, I think that'll be good enough. And then I just need to make sure that plates is on C2 also. So let's take this drone, or I'll get it to C whatever. C4. Okay. That should be pretty good. And let's plug that guy back in. So back into the trig, back into volt per octave, back into out, bring up the volume. There we go, now we're in tune. So this is just going up the scale right now. Let's change it so that it randomizes or the order's a little different. So now it's doing kind of a spiral pattern on the arpeggio. So rather than just playing sequentially up the scale, it's kind of skipping around in a predetermined but kind of more interesting pattern. And we definitely need a lot of delay and reverb on this guy. And since I used kind of a room reverb because I was mostly using it for drums, I think maybe this is not the right reverb for this. Give it a little bit less in the... Bring the feedback down a little bit. Put a little color on the... A little bit more noise on the delay. Maybe what I'll do is give it a little bit of extra reverb from beads. So let's get... I'm running out of red cables. Oh wait, no, I have a couple here. Let's do this. Let's take let's go into beads, and we're going to go full dry, because I don't actually, well, maybe I'll want granules, let's see. And then I need a long red cable to get me back to the mixer. So we're going to go, and actually we can do this in stereo. This will sound good. So left and right, out of beads, into the mixer. Yeah, that's a better sounding reverb for this sound. Let's get a little more bass. And a little more envelope on the bass. Maybe a little bit of granules. All right, now I've got like a fifth going. Let's give it a little bit of lo-fi on those grains. It's kind of interesting sound. Maybe a little less on the grains. More of the built-in voice. And then how about a couple of LFOs to modulate the plate's voice. Just each of the waveforms. Kind of liked it with the shorter recording time on beads better. It's kind of cool. Interstellar, thank you so much. Appreciate you hanging out and listening. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Obviously, I didn't plan any of this, so I'm not going to be winning a Grammy. You know, it's all pretty experimental. That's kind of cool. I like the groove. I feel like I want a little more kick on that bass drum. I'm gonna run it through Icaria just to overdrive it a little bit. Oh yeah, there we go. Give it a little more side chain on that low end. Maybe that's a little too much. Blend in a little of the dry signal. So there's uncompressed, and here comes compressed. Yeah, sounds pretty good. All right, so we're over 2 hours at this point. I think maybe it's time to wrap it up. So for anyone who is still around, and for anyone who might get this far watching the recording, thank you very much for hanging out, for listening to me babble about my love of modular synthesis. I hope it was interesting, fun. Hope you learned something. And if you did, I've got plenty of music that I've created with this that's a little more intentional than what I did here today. So check out my channel, lots more videos of music produced with this setup, and lots more to come. Luca, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm guessing it's probably pretty late there, so really appreciate you sticking around. Cheers, everyone. Have a great Sunday, and a great week, and a great Thanksgiving holiday. For those that celebrate Thanksgiving. Take care.